I'm Roger Anderton, and I've been researching science, and it's mainly physics, for a very long time now. And what I find is there's sort of a dumbing down or suppression or diversion from how things are supposed to be in the physics community. So things that's been sort of like a diversion or a set up. And so from my researches, I found that there was this person, there's a Roger Boskovich, who was in the 18th century, who proposed the further continuation of Newtonian physics into a sort of unified theory. Because when Newton left it with his book, The Principia, he really left it with queries, and so there was sort of a continuation of it to the next stage on. And so when they teach physics at university and so forth, they sort of now miss out Boskovich. They just never seem to mention him, and they just jump straight on to the things that Einstein's talking about. And so it's sort of a dumbing down in the education system for physics, which I found, and various people have pointed it out. This lady here, she pointed out, is the dumbing down of America. And when you look into the physics education setup, you had the sort of revolution in physics, which they say came with 1919 with Einstein, and then you had quantum physics and all the other things. And so what they were teaching as physics to physics students had to take this change, which mainly came about after World War II, where they had to introduce new subjects of quantum physics and relativity and all the other so-say new things they were discovering into what they were teaching physics students. And so they then had to remove from the physics textbooks what they were already teaching students to make room for these new supposed discoveries. And so they justify that because it would mean, if they didn't do that, if they just added the new things to the textbooks on top of what they were already teaching, then the courses would get too long. You would find that people going on for degrees and so forth would have to go on for longer degrees. And so that was part of the dumbing down process, where you were not teaching everything that a student needed to know in physics. You were trimming out the things you didn't think the student needed to be told about anymore. And so part of that trimming out process was this Roger Boskovich, who proposed a unified theory of Newtonian physics. And it's, of course, as I was mentioning now, it's the dumbing down process, as this lady's noticed. Also, other people have noticed that the physics textbooks are bad. And sort of like, this is a famous physicist called Richard Feynman, I think you pronounce it, and in his books like Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, he points out that physics textbooks are bad, and he's putting it in, though, in a joking sort of way. Oh, look, the modern physics textbooks are bad. And the emphasis seems to be, for the people writing modern physics textbooks, is to just concentrate on the money. They're more interested in getting the money from the physics textbooks, from selling it to students and so forth. And that's their prime motive. And they don't care so much that what's in the physics textbooks is not very accurate. And Feynman points out when he was reading a load of them that they are pretty poor standard. And so it's a diversion of emphasis upon quality, taking away from quality the physics textbooks, to emphasising all you're really interested in is making money from selling the physics textbooks. And of course, the way universities and so forth are set up, if they use a particular physics textbook, then the students have to buy that, and the students are students are buying that physics textbook, and the university is probably getting some sort of commission for actually using that thing. So it's all tied into the money process. So part of the dumbing down of physics, and you can say as well, it's coming from the emphasis is being more on making money than actually being accurate in the physics textbooks. And so when it comes to things like, well, even if they're not going to teach Roger Boskovich, well, maybe they should at least mention him briefly, but no, they don't. Most of them just don't mention it briefly. They just go straight on with what is supposed to be the revolution in physics from Einstein and so forth. So if we get on to, another part of the process seems to be during World War II, there was this person called General Groves, and his idea was compartmentalization of science. You had people working on a project which was the Manhattan Project, and you wanted to keep things secret, so you had to compartmentalize things, where people were working on only small parts of the overall project, and they didn't get an overall view of the project, because if they were to sort of leak information, they only knew then a small part of the project and not the whole thing. So it was all part of this process of trying to dumb it down. And of course General Groves is also then part of his mission. He decided to start censoring things in what had been published in physics journals and so forth, and books. So when you try to go back into the library and so forth, which I've done, and try to get certain books on physics from before World War II, certain things have been now cut out, and it's all part of suddenly physics had military applications, and so some parts of physics were deemed to be need to be made secret, and so that was part of the process of cutting things out of physics to dumb it down and not have everybody know too much. And I think Richard Feynman points that out as well, that there's a compartmentalization thing going on in there. So what they've done is they've put up this genius of Einstein, and suddenly everything, modern physics seems to start from Einstein. So Einstein's most famous paper is this one. It's called On the Electrodynamics of Moving Bodies, and in it, which he wrote in 1905, he lays out what becomes special relativity. And one of the most striking points of it is there's no references saying what information sources he's working from. And so when it comes to saying, Einstein's a genius, from all his people who he's got a lot of admirers saying, Einstein's a genius. So when they look at Einstein, it's a question of, he's starting at things afresh. He's not looking at what physics was before him, because he's not citing references to what he's working from. He's suddenly deciding to think through things again. And so they're taking Einstein as a new starting point in doing physics. So hence, once again, you get the omission of people like Roger Boskovich, who were from earlier. You're suddenly saying, we don't have to worry about certain people. We can just go from Einstein. He's starting afresh from things. And that comes out him not providing any references to what he's working from. So there were other people that were working on relativity at the same sort of time as him, and one of the people was Lorentz. So Lorentz came up with a theory based on the same sort of mass that Einstein was working from, and it's called Lorentz transformations, and Einstein doesn't even really cite that. And there was another person, Poincaré, who was working on relativity. And as this sort of message indicates, that Henri Poincaré was the foremost expert on relativity in the late 19th century, and was most likely the first person to formally present the theory of relativity. And it says, despite having read his work, Albert Einstein does not cite Poincaré at all. And that's once again back onto this issue of Einstein's paper on relativity. He doesn't cite Poincaré, so he's not given the impression from the paper that he's working from Poincaré from that paper. It's sort of like giving the impression he's starting from things afresh. So it's not a question of so much these people, Lorentz and Poincaré. You can say, well, they were starting on relativity before Einstein, and let's look at how Einstein then fit into how they were working on things. Instead, a lot of people are looking at it in terms of Einstein is starting afresh, and he's not going from what these other people are saying. So from my point of view, if you look at Poincaré and that, what they say about relativity makes more sense than what Einstein's saying. But because Einstein has given this confusion that he's the starting point for relativity, that most of the textbooks and that just ignore Poincaré and all that and just go on with what Einstein's saying. So, and there was also a similar issue with Hilbert. When Einstein started working on general relativity, there was this other person, Hilbert, who was working on general relativity at the same time. And there's sort of dispute over who came up with the maths first. Was it Einstein or was it Hilbert? And there's the arguments over who did the maths first still goes on and on. But the mainstream likes to promote Einstein over it. So you've got these other people who were sort of onto the issue of relativity, but what Einstein says about relativity seems to be the main focus of what the mainstream says. So from my point of view, it's a diversion from what is better version of relativity, which was pre-Einstein. So when Einstein became famous in 1919, things got really nasty, and you had this sort of issue where people were denouncing Einstein as a person, and they were also denouncing the physics theory that Einstein was talking about. So it all became really quite horribly nasty. So Einstein became famous in 1919, and the sort of main critic against him seems to be Philip Lenard, and he was a Nobel Prize winner in physics. And Einstein's wife was working for him as an assistant. And things got really unpleasant and nasty, and trying to sort out what he was thinking from his point of view. And he probably should have got a Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect, because the experimental work was being done by him, and Einstein's wife knew about this experimental work. And Einstein apparently, when Einstein wrote his paper on the photoelectric effect in 1905, in which he got a Nobel Prize for, in conjunction with other contributions to physics, it really looks like it should have probably come more from the experimental side, from this side of Lenard. But unfortunately, Lenard fell out with Einstein, and the fighting between them got really nasty, and he eventually joined the Nazi Party and gets speared as being anti-Semite and all that sort of thing. So what his criticisms of Einstein's physics gets ignored, because you say, oh yes, this person is bad, so they just ignore what he's saying. But I think he had some valid points about the physics, because when you look at Einstein's physics, it does seem very messed up. So this is the other article about it. So because he gets slagged off as being an evil person, what he says about physics or like gets ignored by what the mainstream they say. So if we go back to earlier, what seems to have been happening is a very weird thing which we can call about as the Illuminati. And the main book I've got on that is this Proofs of the Conspiracy, and it was by John Robison. And John Robison was a physics professor, and he used to, a lot of what he wrote about with physics was to do with this person, this Roger Boskovich. And this was during the 18th century. And Robison was a Freemason, and I think he was quite high up. But what he was complaining about in Proofs of Conspiracy was that he was claiming that the Illuminati were infiltrating the Freemasons. And the Illuminati had the agenda to sort of take over. And what I've gathered from the way the Freemasons operate, you have to do certain rituals, and you get higher up in the degree, and I think you get as high as the 33rd degree from doing the normal Freemasonry. But then when people like the Illuminati are coming in, after you've got to that level, you were then invited to go up into higher levels of the degree, but they were not in the normal part of the Freemasons. So you would say go up to 35th degree, but that would be outside of the normal Masons, and you would be what is then called the exotic lodges of the Freemasons. And so that's what was happening. The higher up Freemasons were getting roped into extending even higher in the degrees to join places like the Illuminati. And when you look at the Illuminati, you find that the people like the Skull and Bones over in America, that is probably what you would recognise as a chapter house of the Free Illuminati. So the agenda of the Illuminati was to take control of everything, and they wanted to take control over the science education. So when it comes to issues of deliberately dumbing down America, dumbing down the education of America, I tie it into that as what these high up people were doing. They were taking over science, and they were putting science into the direction they wanted to do it in. And as people, ladies like this point out, what you're doing is the normal people, the average person, you're trying to make them dumb. You're not giving them sufficient information or education to be able to work out fully what's going on. So it's all part of a continuing process of dumbing people down. And sort of, I tie it into Einstein. First of all, you had the Illuminati, which is really, to a large extent, the bankers. They managed to put a lot of money behind things. They put a lot of money behind promoting Darwin's evolution theory, and that becomes the mainstream on that sort of issue. And then Einstein comes along, and they wanted to put him as the mainstream point of view on physics. So when Einstein comes along with this and then becomes famous in 1919, the bankers, or the Illuminati as you want to call them, suddenly put a massive amount of money behind backing this. And so when you've got people like Leonard, who you were finding they were complaining about it, but the money was on Einstein's side from that particular issue. So they were losing because the money wasn't on their side. The money was on the Einstein side. The money all went into backing Einstein, and also the money went into backing the forming the state of Israel. When Einstein was going around on his tour, he was also collecting money. Part of the tour was to collect money to promote the idea of having Israel. So you can see it's all tied into money and everything of what's going on. So that's that side of it. Okay, so trying to pick up the money seems to be behind Einstein, and the international bankers and so forth. They put the money behind promoting Einstein as this genius. But when you look into the history in more detail, you find that there's lots of other people behind it, and kind of like people like Lorentz and Poincaré and David Hilbert, and there's lots of other people, but the emphasis seemed to be on Einstein. And because he wrote papers and he doesn't give references to other people, as this article points out, Poincaré was talking about relativity before Einstein, but Einstein doesn't give reference to that in the paper he writes. So it sort of like diverts attention from what people were saying about relativity other than Einstein. So the sort of building process for modern physics seems to be taking it from what Einstein was saying, both in relativity and in quantum physics, apart from a sort of acknowledgement that Max Planck in 1900 came up with the idea of applying the quantum idea to the ultraviolet catastrophe. Most of the quantum physics and relativity sort of is initiated by Einstein rather than these other people. And so with the dumbing down process of physics and education, they kind of cut things out from pre-Einstein. They sort of like tried to take a jump from people like Newton and Maxwell, miss out as much as they can and jump straight to Einstein. And the physics textbooks are then edited out from the older stuff which was taught before Einstein, and things like Poincaré gets chopped out of the physics textbooks now. And you can, if you study it in the history, you can see that there was an elite group of people who were trying to do that. They were trying to take over the education system. So if you go on to specifics about some of the things I complain about with Einstein, one of the big issues I have with him is in that paper on special relativity, he doesn't give references for what he's working from. And you have people like more modern scholars like John Norton, who's kind of supposed to be a respected academic on Einstein studies. And so in his paper on this one here by John Norton, he says, it says on one page, even today, the point needs emphasis. The Michelson-Morley experiment is fully compatible with an emission theory of light that contradicts the light postulate. Now, I disagree with quite a few things that Norton says, but what he's pointing out there, from that bit there, he's pointing out that the Michelson-Morley experiment isn't supporting Einstein's relativity, special theory of relativity, because Einstein is supposed to has this idea speed of light is absolute the same for all observers, whatever their speed, and that seems to be a special theory of relativity. And if you're there as a student, physics student, normally what the physics you'd be saying to the physics teacher, what justification do you have for special relativity? And the teacher would be saying it's confirmed by experiment, and the experiment they would be talking about would have been the Michelson-Morley experiment. And now suddenly this person Norton is admitting that the Michelson-Morley experiment doesn't support special relativity. It's actually the Michelson-Morley experiment can be interpreted by different theories, not just by Einstein's special relativity. So it's not really providing proof for it. But the initial teaching of Einstein's special relativity in the older physics textbooks and that, if you're going back, say 50 years, most of them would be saying Einstein's special relativity is supported by Michelson-Morley experiment. And now the academics are sort of like tending to admit, no, that's wrong. The experiment is not proving Einstein's special relativity. They're then trying to divert attention and say other experiments support Einstein's special relativity, but when you sort of look into these other experiments, no, they don't support it either. So the initial thing of them saying Michelson-Morley experiment supports special relativity, no, it doesn't. It's only just a subjective interpretation of that experiment that is being interpreted in terms of special relativity. And with the other experiments you find it's the same thing. So when you want to say what is the proof for special relativity, there doesn't seem to be really there. It just seems to be a subjective interpretation of experiments. Picking out from Einstein's special theory of relativity, Einstein's special relativity makes sort of claims like this: speed of light is absolute, the same for all observers, whatever their speed, their special relativity. And I think that sort of statement is a bit vague myself, but they say sort of things like that. And so you've got this basis of special relativity, and you've got these. So if you were a student, say 50 years ago, you would be taught special relativity, and you're asking the teacher, the professor, what is the justification for this? They would be telling you special relativity is confirmed by experiment, and the experiment they would be citing would be the Michelson-Morley experiment. But now you've got this person, J. Norton, who's supposed to be a respected scholar of Einstein, and in his paper, in that one, he admits that the Michelson-Morley experiment doesn't have to be interpreted from believing the speed of light is constant. And the issue becomes more a case of experiments have been subjectively interpreted to agree with Einstein's relativity, when really those experiments can be interpreted by lots of different experiments. So that is sort of something they sort of kind of hide from students, that they're projecting to the student, these experiments prove Einstein's relativity, when really they don't. That is a misrepresentation of the experiments. The experiments are only subjectively being interpreted from Einstein's relativity. And so when I've looked at this issue, the philosophers of science, they look at the issue of science methodology, and what they've got is something they sometimes refer to as a dirty secret, and it's something which is not normally taught to physics students, that there's a problem of underdetermination. And the problem of underdetermination is, given an experiment, you've done your measurements, you've calculated so and so, you think, well, does that prove a theory? And it doesn't, because that experiment can actually be interpreted by lots of probably different theories. So you've got what is called empirically equivalent theories. So these empirically equivalent theories are then how this experiment could be interpreted, and that's a case of what they call is underdetermination. You've got an experiment, but the results of that experiment don't have to be interpreted by one theory, they can be interpreted by lots of different theories. And so in the case of Einstein, when they teach this to physics students, they don't bother telling them that. They just tell them, usually, this experiment proves Einstein, and it doesn't. That's just a misrepresentation of the experiment. The issue now has become underdetermination. Experiments can be interpreted by lots of different theories, and it's forced to keep promoting that it only could be interpreted by Einstein's way of doing things. So this is what I pick up. So this is what he says there. This is John Norton says in his thing. Even today, this points and needs emphasis. The Michelson-Morley experiment is fully compatible with an emission theory of light that contradicts the light postulate. And the light postulate is this, from Einstein's relativity. So you can actually interpret it, Michelson-Morley experiment, from a theory which isn't special relativity. And Norton will try to say, well, there's other experiments that can only be interpreted by special relativity, or something towards that effect, he would try to say. But actually, when you look at those other experiments, no, they can be interpreted by lots of different theories. So it is a misrepresentation to keep saying it's Einstein's relativity all the time to these physics students. And particularly when you look at the people who were involved in relativity before Einstein, like Lorentz and Poincaré, what they were saying about physics was making more sense than what Einstein was saying. So putting the emphasis on what Einstein's saying all the time and pushing for his version of physics, of his theory, it doesn't really make that much sense. Okay.
Who was pushing Einstein now?
Who was pushing? Well, the backing from Einstein, the money, the bankers seemed to back Einstein. Einstein became famous in 1919, and then all the money seemed to went towards backing what Einstein was saying on relativity. So that's what sort of happened. The big money went towards him, and the people who were saying different, well, they weren't getting the big money to carry on. It's, in order to keep teaching in academia, you need funding. And so if you weren't saying the correct thing, you don't get your funding. So Einstein's relativity, what he says about relativity, becomes sort of a dogma. It's where the money goes.
Right. Is this like the Rothschild, that they have a foundation, kind of like the Rockefeller Foundation?
Yeah, they were looking at taking over the education system by what they did was they funded it, and they wanted what they were, from their point of view, standards of education, and so they were only wanting certain things to be taught. It was standardising the education. It wasn't diversity of different opinions. It was sort of like one point of view has been promoted, and in the case of Einstein, one point of view has been promoted, which was Einstein's point of view on relativity. And with Einstein, he rebelled against quantum physics, and he lost out there. The money then went to promoting a different point of view to quantum physics to what Einstein was talking about. So even though he won on the promoting his point of view on relativity, he lost on the quantum physics side. And that's how these things get messed up by people.
So it was an organization behind the scenes opening doors, not necessarily doing away with the opposition, but opening doors for the people they wanted to get across to the public to influence the field.
Yeah.
I think that's how it works.
Probably in those sort of terms, it's sort of like they're only wanting to promote one point of view. So the point of view they promote is Einstein's relativity along the lines he talks about, and then they promote quantum physics more along the lines of people like Niels Bohr, and then they look at the physics history of things before Einstein, and they kind of like cut lots of that out from the physics education system. So you're getting a dumbed down physics as to what they're taught to physics students. There's only their dogmatic version of what they want to teach is being taught. Censored physics, one point of view, and anything else is not going to get funded. So Einstein wrote his famous papers in 1905 on several on relativity, one on atomic physics, one on quantum physics with photoelectric effect, and roughly the mainstream takes that as the beginning of modern physics. And Einstein, in his papers, didn't cite any references. So the mainstream is then treating that as roughly the starting point of modern physics, as a new starting point, and all the other bits, what other people were saying before him, they can sort of like ignore. So a lot of the physics they're teaching has had what people were saying about relativity and quantum physics has been edited out from what they teach. And so one of the main people I found was this Roger Boskovich, and he was really talking about quantum physics in the 18th century, but as part of their they edit out that, and they only really treat quantum physics as starting from 1900 from Max Planck and then being picked up by Einstein, and they sort of like ignore all these bits from the history. On the Einstein's relativity side, there was other people talking about relativity, and part of that Einstein was in communication with people who were sort of from the Hungarian region of the world, or Croatia or Serbia or Bosnia and all that sort of place, the area of the world where the boundaries of those countries stop varying. One of the people he was in contact was Leo Szilard, and Leo Szilard was the person who explained to Einstein that building the atom bomb was possible. And from that, Einstein then wrote the letter to the President of America saying that an atom bomb was possible, and that sort of like, so say, initiated the Manhattan Project. But from that sort of thing, Einstein didn't really seem to know that it was possible until Szilard told him. And you've got these people from that sort of area of the world, Hungary part of the world, who sort of like knew quite a lot more physics than what Einstein knew. And Einstein was sort of only being promoted as the top man, but there was other people who knew physics in great more detail than he did. So when they had the Manhattan Project, they had a group of people, physicists, I think it was 3 of them. It was Edward Teller as one of them, and these Hungarians seemed to know physics in more detail than the rest of the physicists in the Manhattan Project. And they were sort of like, one of the jokes were that these people were aliens. But I think it was only just a joke. It's just that the way I look at it, the tradition, the physics that they were coming from was more grounded in, back to this person again, in what Boskovich was saying. So they had a greater understanding of physics coming from a tradition of Boskovich. So, and that's the tradition they sort of now cut out from what is taught at university. Not many people know about Boskovich. You've got people like Feynman, who does know about Boskovich, but doesn't really go into that much detail about him. But the most of the teaching is just ignore things like that. So, and also you've got peculiarities like this H.G. Wells story about the time machine. And what year was it? It was published in, I think, 1898. H.G. Wells writes this science fiction story about a time machine. And in this story, they're talking about the 4th dimension. And when they start talking about relativity to physics students, then they're talking about Einstein and Minkowski introducing this idea of time as the 4th dimension. But actually it goes back further than him to science fiction. So you're sort of like missing out all these strange connections to modern physics, which is happening before Einstein. So if I can read it, the time traveler says, any real body must have extension in four directions. It must have length, breadth, thickness, and duration. But through a natural infinity of the flesh, which I will explain to you in a moment, we incline to overlook this fact. There are really four dimensions, three, which we call the three planes of space, and a fourth, time. So in this science fiction story, time is the fourth dimension, and this is 1898, long before 1905, when Einstein gave his relativity theory. And lots of the sort of ideas of the time machine seem to be incorporated into Einstein's relativity, where you've got this idea of a spaceship. If it goes fast enough, then the person in the spaceship experiences time differently to a person who stays on Earth. And so you kind of like got this idea of moving into the future. The person on the spaceship is aging at a different rate to the person who stays at home on the Earth. And so it's kind of like treating a spaceship as a time machine. And that is just from special relativity. And then they bring all this science fiction thing in. Well, if you've got acceleration and if you've got black holes and all this other stuff which they add on to relativity, then maybe you can travel back in time as well. So it all seems to be coming from a kind of physics where time travel is possible. And it all seems to come in from H.G. Wells' Time Machine. A lot of what they say in what they teach for physics in by the mainstream I disagree with, but the sort of like the basic ideas seem to be coming from science fiction. And then you see this science fiction then put into films like Interstellar, where you've got spaceships going through spaceships and black holes and time travel and all that sort of thing involved in there. And so it all becomes science fiction-y. So when Einstein became famous in 1919, he had all this problem of people complaining. Einstein got straight into controversy with this relativity. People started complaining about it, and it didn't make sense to a lot of people, and they came up with this idea that only very few people understood Einstein's relativity, and you had to be really clever to understand it. And it's sort of like, who exactly were these people who understood Einstein's relativity? Because you can look at people like Poincaré, who unfortunately died before 1919, and he seemed to be saying different to Einstein in several areas. And you've got other people like Lorentz, who seem to be saying different to Einstein. But one of the problems with Einstein is he keeps changing his mind. But who are these supposed to be people who understood Einstein's relativity? Because when you look at these people who were talking about it, they all seem to be disagreeing. So you had something which seemed to be a disagreement about being promoted. And so basically it was something promoted that didn't really make much sense. And you had the same sort of thing with quantum physics when Einstein lost control over quantum physics. Einstein said, there you go, God does not play dice. And that was his disagreement with quantum physics. And the rest of the other physicists under Niels Bohr decided to go their way, and Einstein seemed to lose his influence on the direction of investigating quantum physics. But the direction quantum physics went in didn't really make much sense either. And you get all these popular books talking about relativity and talking about quantum physics, and so often pointing out it doesn't really make much sense. You just got to accept it because experiments show it. But the theory is beyond normal human comprehension. But when you look at the experiments, I think, oh, they're just misrepresenting the experiments for that. But one of the ways they've got to teach it to people is, even though what we're teaching you to the student, when the professor presents it to the student, even though doesn't make much sense, you've just got to accept it because that's the way how nature is. So you've got people like David Mermin, who I'm quoting, he's a physicist, and quoting from this sort of article here, and it's sort of like, can Feynman have said this? And it's sort of the argument, if I were forced to sum up the sentence, what the Copenhagen interpreter says to me, it'd be shut up and calculate. And it seems to be the sort of thing that Feynman was saying, and David Mermin is querying, did Feynman really say that? And so it seems to be a question of they're promoting an idea, shut up and calculate. So a student sitting there, the professor's teaching him, and the student's saying, oh, I don't quite understand this about relativity or even quantum physics. And the professor is saying, don't worry about that, just do the maths and do the calculations, and that's what all you need to do. And it's the issue of the philosophy or the understanding of what's being said. Forget that. Just do the maths, concentrate on that, and don't go into the issue of trying to understand it. And that seems to be one of the ways they promote things. Don't think about it, just do it. So that's how they managed to create this sort of mess in physics. Or the other side of it, they seem to say, well, it's confirmed by experiment. But when you sort of like actually analyse the experiments, you say, no, those experiments don't really confirm what's being said. So we've got this famous physicist, it's Louis Eason, and he was an experimental physicist who did a lot of work on the atomic clock. And if you talk to these people who promote Einstein's relativity, often they will have site experiments, say, sort of done by Eason. And Eason was opposed to relativity. So he's got a website, it's sort of called Relativity, Joke or Swindle, where Louis Eason states his view on relativity. So Louis Eason didn't really believe in relativity, he thought it was full of mistakes. But the experiments that Eason did were very important ones. And so the people who believe in Einstein's relativity start saying those experiments prove relativity. But Eason says no, they don't. So you've got a conflict there. And when you look at what Eason's saying, what Eason's saying says makes sense, and those experiments which the people in relativity are trying to promote don't really fit their beliefs. So we have things like the Muller project, which keeps reference of all of the dissenting articles with relativity, and it's been going on now for more than 95 years. There's been lots of articles criticising relativity. This is one example where it's kept. And when it goes to teaching of relativity, they don't tell you that there's been what they don't say to the students, there's been a great deal of dissent about what we're teaching you. Normally they just teach the relativity, and they don't say, but all these other people have protested against it, because when you try to point this out to the professors, their argument will be, I'm paid here to teach relativity. I'm not here to teach about the criticisms of relativity. So you've got the criticisms that are cut out from what we're being taught. You're just getting taught one point of view all the time in physics. The point of view they're being paid to teach is to promote relativity, and it's not to promote the contrary point of view. So it's always unfair in the academic situation. And they miss out so much from what they should at least give brief reference to. They should give at least a brief reference to that. People like Eaton were disagreeing with it, and they miss out things at the end that Einstein, one of his famous things he said at the end, and this is one of the last things he said in a letter a year before he died. He said, "I consider it quite possible that physics cannot be based on the field concept, that is, on continuous structures. Then nothing remains of my entire castle in the sky, including the theory of gravitation, but also nothing of the rest of modern physics." So in 1954, the year before he died, he was even considering the possibility that everything he'd done was wrong. Yeah. So that is something else that they miss out teaching to physics students. Well, Einstein was having his doubts about it. And so they're sort of like polarised all the time on, we were only going to teach one thing, we're not going to even mention all the other little things, like people were criticising it all the time. That even Einstein was beginning to have doubts. They're going to miss all that out. There's not even a small reference. And this is why I think it's a sort of deliberate dumbing down of America. They sort of like, it's not, there should be, all very well promoting one point of view all the time to the physics students, but you should at least make a little reference that, oh, it was not always agreed on, that Einstein changed his mind, that Einstein was not even sure at the end, all these little things. And even my main person I'm promoting is Boskovich. And so even a brief mention of Boskovich in the 18th century was involved in atomic physics. Yep, brief little clip. Even if you don't go into details about it, that's all missed out. There's nothing presented to physics students telling them there's anything different to what we're teaching you. They're only teaching one thing, one point of view, and they're ignoring everything else. Everything else is getting swept under the rug. And that's what I found out. So I've done my physics education, done my degree in maths and physics combined, and sort of like, well, you think to yourself, yeah, that's the basics. I've been taught the basics. And no, you then look into it in more detail and say, they've missed out a lot. They've not even made brief mention that there's dissent with what I've been taught in physics. They've just missed out this ginormous amount of stuff out there, which is all complaining about what I've been taught. They've only taught one point of view. Taught this point. They've been paid to teach one point of view, and that's what they've done. They've taught one point of view, and they've not mentioned that there's been any dissent with that point of view. It's just corruption of the education process. It's dumbing down. Thank you.